Hello and welcome to Ivory Blush Roses. My name is Lisa and today we're stitching seam 12. I apologize for the noise in the background because the leaf blowers and chainsaws have been going since really early this morning. So I apologize if any of that noise makes it into the videos. But let's go ahead and get started. I have our bowl of stitches. Let's pick one out. There's one. Let's see what it says. Okay. So this one is a combination chevron and herringbone. It's a combination I love. We've not done either one of these stitches on this block yet, so I'm really excited about that one. Next question is, where do we want to do it on this block? This stitch already has 2 passes on it, so I think when we get to the end, we don't want to add more than one additional item. And I'm just looking at our block to see where we might want to go with this. I'd kind of like one of those longer seams for this. So we have this long one here. We've got a really long one over here. We've got kind of a moderate one here, and also here. I sort of like the idea of doing this one here. I'm thinking this one or this one. Again, I need to think about where I'm cutting off of my edges too. So that one would have more space to show up than it would on some of these other ones. Decisions. That's got that curve in it. That'll be a little bit harder with chevron. Not so hard with herringbone. Let's hold on to this stitch for a while. We also have this one here. Let's do this one. So let's do that seam, and then I think we need to choose some colors for it. We have 2 stitches. They're going to overlap one another, so coming over one another, and I would like those to be in 2 different colors. We could use green on here, and that would be good because we haven't had much green on this side of the block yet. We've got it in the fabric, but not in the stitching over here. And in looking at this, the obvious choice would be to go this slightly cooler one, but this also could be a good spot to use this one that's got a little bit of brown in it. Actually, I think that's a better contrast for this fabric. Let's use that one. We're going to try and speed some of this decision-making process up today. So there's one, and then we need a second one. Because I've got brown, I don't want that, and I've got the orange, so I don't want to go too dark of an orange, so we need to stick with something that's a little lighter. Now we've used this in a couple of other spots. I think that works, and that would give us a break from going with the bright gold. But let's also take a look at something else, because we're going to need 3 colors, I think, because we're probably going to add some straight stitches or lazy daisies or pistol stitches to this one. Here's that beige. I actually think I like that combo right there, and then maybe that for accent. I wonder if we go with this if we need a brighter accent. I'm wondering about this one. I'm going to put these 4 colors out. I think we're only going to use 3. I'm not sure if we're going to use this one or this one, but we're definitely going to use these 2 for the chevron and herringbone, and then these will be accent. So wonderful. Let's get that in the hoop and get it going. This is that one that actually crosses over this seam. So I think we're going to do the whole thing across here. I'm going to start with this beigey gray. I've got my needle already threaded up. And I think I'm going to start with the herringbone. I could go either way. Whichever one sits on top is going to be the one most noticeable. And I'm just feeling like the herringbone would work better in the background. I'm going to come up here. I think my hoop is about 3/4 to an inch wide. And so I have that much over the edge. And remember, we're taking off probably another inch. So here. So I'm going to stitch as close to that hoop as I can go, just so I give myself that room should I decide I want to use more of that. So I'm going to actually start down in here. This is going to be a little bit awkward stitching at first, just because I'm in there tight. I guess I'm going about 1/4 of an inch over each side of the seam. And because this is going to be a busy one, I want to make it slightly bigger. So I have to decide, do I want this to be a right angle or come out a little bit? And I think we're going to go a little wider than 45 degrees. And so remember, with herringbone, you're really taking sort of a back stitch on the wrong side and coming up. So I'm always going to make sure that this thread and this one, they're always parallel to one another and the tops come across even. My experience has been that if you don't get the tops even, that's when it looks wrong. And I've got to remember I'm on this angle here and not working straight. Having the line go straight across helps me keep things more even sometimes. So when I'm working on this angle, I have to pay special attention to it. Oh, and that picks up those little flowers really nice. And so I'm probably coming back, making my crossover for that herringbone about 3/16 of an inch. It's more than an eighth, less than a quarter. Now I got a little shallow there. So I always find this one so helpful to lay that thread out so I can see where I'm going with it. And I need to remember to come down a little farther this time. As we come into this other seam, I'm not going to stitch all the way over it. Because if I start stitching over it, then it looks a little more confusing. So I'm actually going to end that stitch right here at that chain. And I want to think, where's that stitch going to come up and where is it going to come back? And we're going to come out here and go down. On this side, we've changed angle ever so slightly. I'm going to come up just between that and that French knot. I got to think about this a minute. But because we've turned a little bit, it's visually going to change slightly. Now we're going to try and stay steady off of this one at roughly those same distances. Boy, we're just popping cat hair all over here. I'm going to come over here. So yeah, this angle is really not quite correct. That's okay. We're going to correct it here. And some of this will get... I need to think about this. This is not really quite right. That would be there. So I think I put this too far over. Let me pull that out and we'll fix it, because I can tell already it looks out of balance, like it's not continuous. And I really want it to look like it's continuous but going under that seam. The question is, can I pull that? Here, I have this whole little thing of orts. Let's just find a piece of thread and lay out, trying to take into account where we're going here. So I think we're going to come up here. Oh my gosh, that was covered in cat hair. Hold on, folks. Goodness sakes. I think that's in a better spot. I think I'm going to be happier with the spacing of this. Yeah, that's much better. Sometimes it doesn't take much. I think we didn't even move that over an 1/18 of an inch, but it just makes such a difference in how it completes that pattern. And then especially on this orange velvet, it's a softer pile. It's not necessarily thicker, but it does a really good job of hiding the thread. I'm exaggerating the stitch ever so slightly to accommodate that so it doesn't get lost in the pile of the fabric. I think that's been the biggest learning curve for me on this piece, is accommodating for that. And I can tell I'm creeping up off of this brown in toward the orange, so I need to watch that. So we're going to go down a little further this time. I noticed that there's a subtle curve in this seam as it comes down here, so I'm trying to widen the top here ever so slightly to accommodate that. I also realize I'm getting a little closer together down here. Got this big roll of fabric over here. That's not helping me either. And this is one of those spots where the fabric has gotten kind of bobbled to get up here. It's a little bunched. Where the fabric has gotten a little bunched up over here. And so now that we're putting this stitching in, that's going to actually help make that less noticeable, I think. And that should be our last stitch for the herringbone on this. Yeah, so we started off a little wider and got a little closer together as we've gone. That's just the way it goes sometimes. I think when we get it all said and done, it's not going to be terribly noticeable. Let me turn it over. Make our knot. Let's switch to our green thread, and this time we're going to do our chevron stitch. This stitch is going to go opposite to that. I'm actually wondering about making it ever so slightly smaller. So for this one, I want to make sure my centers line up with the center of that. So I'm going to go down. So I think we're going to make the top of the chevron come out even with where these herringbone stitches cross. And remember, chevron's got this little cap on it. And this is one of those that I always prefer to scoop stitch. So bear with me as I adjust to stab stitching it. So we're going to come up right about there. Once I have figured out my guidelines where I'm stitching to, then I don't need to mark because I already have my guide points. So I'm coming up again, this line and that line where they cross, that's where my stitch goes down. And we stitch the little cap. And you can vary the size of the caps on these. I've done them really big sometimes, and I'm doing them fairly small on this particular one. And I just want to come back up at that same corner, and again, find my center. And on. And because I really want to see clearly, I'm holding that cap out of the way before I pull it tight so I can bring my thread, new angle up in the same spot, and that will help with my continuity. And I don't want to stitch through my thread, stitch next to it. But you can see how even that starts to look, and it gives it a really interesting appearance. And I mean, you could vary this with herringbone and cretonne, with chevron and cretonne. They both work really well in this combination. I've done this where one of the stitches comes off at a much steeper angle, and so you get a really tall stitch, and that could work with either one of these. So just endless possibilities for adapting and changing this one. It offers so many opportunities as well to add those little embellishments. So when I'm looking at this and I'm thinking about what do I want to do on it, I often bring stuff out of the crosses on the herringbone, or I set things on top of the little caps of the chevron. I have taken this stitch and put little French knots down the center of all these little squares that we're creating. Whoops. Gotta finish the cap. I thought that wasn't looking right. So the way we have it right now, it's a much tighter seam. You know, the design is more contained. It's not leading off outside of the seam. Everything is contained within the seam treatment. And sometimes that works really well. And sometimes you want things that are going to bring it off. And so that would be when we would do our pistol stitch or straight stitches, or, you know, groups of lazy daisy triads or straight stitches. So that one I'm going to bring there. And I feel like we're just kind of running into that, so I think we're going to come up. I think we're going to come up there. Not sure my angle is exactly correct, but we'll work with it. Again, that's where it's sort of shifting direction slightly as the seam has changed. And now we're kind of back on track. So it allows this seam to take precedence. So it's a quieter seam with these colors than this one's bright. This one is quiet but bright in its own way. It's got that bright gold in it. And that's okay. We have these same colors sprinkled throughout the block. They're all colors we've been using. And so it still has that cohesiveness that we're looking for. And after a bit, you just sort of get into a rhythm, and there it goes. So I want to thank you for your patience with all the issues I've been having with exporting my videos so that I can upload them. It has been a frustrating journey, and I have not fully understood why things that were working for me 2 or 3 weeks ago are suddenly causing problems. But I have also discovered that that's happening for other people as well. I use a program called Final Cut Pro, which is an Apple product. I've been using it for, boy, a good 2.5 years. And never had any issues with it. And I really like the program until this recent thing. Most of the time my little workaround is helping, but every now and then it doesn't work. We're supposed to have some rain this afternoon, which I'm really looking forward to. It has been exceptionally dry here for quite a long time compared to many other parts of the country. I think Colorado and Wyoming have been just exceptionally dry for the last couple of months, compared to places like the southeast that have gotten so much rain. My gosh. So we can tell that was a little browner section of this thread, not as green. But I think now we're coming back into the green, and that will be a good way to finish this off. Yeah, my stitches got a little narrower down here, I think. I was thinking that beigey gray was going to recede a little bit underneath this green, but it still shows up pretty bright. So it brings some of that light into that seam. So I think we're going to go with the orange rather than the browny gold. I think it will look better in the long run. Warm this seam up a little bit, but it's enough lighter orange than this that it's still going to show up. So you can see how we're just trying to finish this seam off down here. I'm just going to take this one right to the seam, and so whatever we do then on this seam here will be the one that gives way to this one. All right, there is that one. Let me turn that over. All right, then we'll make our knot. What do we want to add to this? I'm actually thinking that we're just going to do little straight stitch triads, and I think we might come off of there, but I think this orangey thread will look good on that. And we could always do a combination too, where you put a little lazy daisy in the middle with two straight ones off the side. Or do we want to do them off of here? I actually think I want to come off the top of the gray one. Bring that out. And then just let that chevron be on its own down there. Let's try it and see. I'm not going to sit it down right inside that little V there. I'm going to come up even with the top to start. And like always, I'm going to do my middle one first. And I think on this one I'm going to work my way up one side and then come back down the other. What do we think of that? I think it just gives it a nice little spark. I do think I'm going to make the side ones slightly bigger, and I need to be careful to bring them up a little higher. This one came out a little far to the side. So I want to be up here. And again, slightly exaggerating because on this fabric they're disappearing otherwise. So I think on this seam, it's just little simple straight stitches. I am probably going to stitch most of this seam and come back and show it to you when it's done. And that will avoid me having to time-lapse all of this footage, which seems to be when I'm having trouble exporting my footage. I can get it uploaded, I just can't get it out of the editing program once I've finished editing. So by coming up one side, the seam, and then down on the other, with the variegated thread, it changes the way it varies on the seam, so you don't end up with all one light section here. So it should be a little different going both sides as we go up. Alright, now we're going to have a little bit of a gap. Since I'm coming all the way over here, I'm actually going to turn that over. I'm just going to take a couple of little catch stitches here as I get from one side of that seam to the other, so that I don't have that long piece dragging across the back. And I think we're coming up somewhere in there. We'll find out. Oh, it came up pretty close. Good. Okay, so here we are, right there. And as I'm working farther and farther away from myself, I realize I have to really pay attention to where I'm going, because it's easy to get out of line with things. But I'm pretty pleased with how it's looking. I think I chose the right color here. I think the orange was the better choice. So this one is just good meditative stitching. Just sit and stitch and let your mind wander. Yeah, if I was going to be adding beads to this, which I'm not, because it's a pillow that's going to be on the sofa, I would probably add them right down in the centers of all of these, or maybe even on top of the little chevron caps. Since this one is a double seam and we've added one element, I'm not going to come back and add another element to it. I could add French knots, but I'm not going to. Because I think once you start adding more than any of the other seams have on it, I think it will start to look out of balance. And we have no more than 3 passes on any of the other seams. Yeah, and that orange actually shows up really nicely on this fabric. I wasn't sure what was going to be the best thread on there, but I'm pretty happy with this. Sometimes when you get those busy fabrics, it doesn't matter what you put onto it, the stitches just disappear. So if you've watched my basic crazy quilting series, and looked at those seam stitches that I did on that block, they really did just disappear into the piecing on that one. Because those fabrics were so busy. So that's one of the reasons I like solids or muted patterns a little better. All right, I think that is the last seam on here. Let's turn that over. Make one more knot. And I think that one is done. So let me get it out of the hoop here. Here is our seam coming up across this one. So I think that looks really good. I think it balances nice. It brings through that beige that we used over here on that triad seam. I'm really pleased with that seam. I think it turned out well. I think it's a good balance. I was happy with our color choices. I think they all turned out well. I'm so grateful you're here with me today. I'm having so much fun making these videos and stitching on this project. Have a wonderful day, happy stitching, and I'll see you in the next video.